And the first event really came to us when we were, well, in the pub, I guess, if you like, over a beer. We were sitting there, it was last summer sometime, and we were talking about having intellectual conversations over a pint that we regularly do on a Friday after school. And we were like, isn't that great that we can just share our thoughts with everyone? And we were like, well, how about sharing it with you guys, the stuff that we love, the stuff that we're passionate about, that a lot of it you don't see that, you see a lot of what we teach you, really. So this event came to us through that, and really we were talking about it, and nothing ever came of it, as most ideas in the pub do, until I went and watched Brian Cox up in London on Thursday night, and I was sitting there, and massive crowd, 10,000 people sitting there watching him talking about what he loves, and I was like, how do I get to be up there, as you usually do? And it comes from putting yourself out there and actually doing things like this, doing talks with you guys about things we love, and hopefully you guys enjoying it and then wanting more of it. And 2 days later, I think, I was laying in bed and got my phone out and I messaged Carl, and I was like, what about it? What about putting in on an event? And we started bouncing back. It was about 11, 12 o'clock at night, started bouncing back conversations, and that next morning we then went to Mr. Derek with the idea. And and since then it's come to this. I don't know if you want to do a little bit before we...
Yeah, sure. Yeah, 12 o'clock at night, remember that was. I should have put my phone on silent, and maybe this would have never happened. So I think the real thing I just wanted to add to what we said there is that what we wanted to present to you, and what we want this to be, is to show you, our students, also our colleagues, our teacher colleagues, anybody else that wants to see it, that we are more than just, as Chris has said, teachers, that we've got our own passions and our own interests, and that these are the things that fuel us, aside from the specifications and the mark schemes and everything else. So what you're going to be getting from each of us tonight is just one, because trust me, there are many things we could have talked about this evening, but you're just getting a picture from each of us of one of the things that we find passionate, found interesting in our lives, and as Chris has said, want to share with you. So thank you for turning up tonight.
So today, the two talks, one from me is going to be on cosmology, and the other one is going to be on psychology from Carl. I managed to find a picture that actually brings the two together, a bit of cosmology within a skull. So I like that. I thought, I'm going to use that picture just in the background. Okay, so the first talk from me is a journey from something to nothing. So we're going to take a journey together from what we see around us all the way back, hopefully, to where there was nothing there. And my challenge is, in the space of maximum 30 minutes, to go through 13.6 billion years of history. So the challenge is set. Whether or not I'll be able to make it is down to how quickly I can get through. So I'm going to try not to go too quick. So start my timer. Here we go. Start with nice, easy stuff. And I'm sorry, but at some point along the way you might get confused. I'm not going to hide that from you. But let's start with something familiar. So a familiar picture for us is here. So maybe go on a hike with friends or something, go on holiday, and there you are on top of a mountain and you're looking out at that beautiful scenery. Pretty beautiful, isn't it? Well, I see something slightly different because I'm a physicist. First thing I see is this. I see, oh look, some carbon. I see this, oh, oxygen in the air, I can breathe, I can be alive. I see this, I see hydrogen in the water. I'm like, yes, H2O. And then I go, oh look, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, that makes up carbohydrates and all the other stuff that we're made of. I'm like, yeah, good. The world is made of the same stuff as me. I see nitrogen in the air, that's there, that's making sure the air is unreactive so that we can actually survive. And I see all these elements in the rocks, all the silicon, the calcium, the iron, the stuff that makes us up. And I look around and I see, well, what makes me up? And what makes the world up is all exactly the same thing. But then maybe later on, in fact, let's just have a look at the composition, because actually you look at most of the things are carbon now. But later on, when you're out there and you're camping maybe, you might put down your drink and look up. And there I am, looking up. And you look up at the sky and you go, oh look, beautiful. Okay, what makes that up? You do a little bit of reading and you find out it's all the same stuff. Same stuff in space as down here on Earth. The only difference is when you go to look at how much stuff is up there, what makes all that up. And you see, all of those things, there's not much of it, but then there's quite a lot of that. So, in space, most things are hydrogen, but remember, back down here on Earth, there's a lot of heavier stuff. And you go, well, how does what's in space, all of that, end up being the stuff that makes us up, makes life, makes us important? And the answer are these things: stars. Okay? So, inside the stars, just to make sure that you're aware, stars are very hot, so I wouldn't touch it. And because it's so hot, it's not made of gas. So a gas is like this: you have the nucleus of the atom, you have the electrons going around, and as they move around when they're warm, they all stay together, it's neutral atoms. Inside a star, everything's a plasma. Plasma means it's hotter than that, which means when everything's moving around, the electrons aren't bound to anything. So when we're looking inside stars, we're looking at the plasma that makes it up, and these nuclei, they're the important bits. We ignore the electrons for that. Okay? So, first things first, I've got a little prop I'm going to use twice. It's a very expensive prop, we use in science quite a lot, so blue. So, first thing I'm going to do, blow that. So, balloon, I blew it up because I was able to put some energy into the particles in there and force it out. Okay? And there is a force that's collapsing that, the force of the last bit, the rubber trying to pull it back, the tension in the rubber. Okay? And if I didn't hold the bottom, the whole thing would collapse down. Use one, I'll get it used later. So, what's happening inside this star, there is gravity pulling in. So there must be something holding it up. Something causing pressure, like the gas inside the balloon holding it up. Okay? So what physicists have been able to do is they've been able to look inside stars and say, well, because stars are there, and stars stay up, they don't collapse in on themselves, there must be something there, there must be some energy being released. And the way the energy is released comes through a process we know of nuclear fusion. It's the one we're trying to solve our energy situation on Earth. Okay? And that nuclear fusion takes this plasma we saw, with all the hydrogen nuclei, that big H I had, all of that hydrogen out there in space, and it fuses them all together. And as it goes through this process of fusion and decay, and fusion and decay, and fusion, all of these nuclei get forced together by the big pressure and temperature in the middle of the stars to get fusion and decay. Just go through a couple more, I think, there you go. And what we've been able to do, just by a few clicks of my mouse, is to go from these hydrogen up to these helium. We've built heavier elements. And if I put some of these together, we can make the carbon that we made, the oxygen that we breathe in. So the stuff that makes us, first off, if we answer the question, well, where do we come from in that case, comes from the middle of stars. So the first realization I'd like to share with you is, where does the stuff around us come from? The planet Earth, everything originated in a star. And at some point, that star would have gone bang, it died, and all of the stuff that was made in the middle, all of this oxygen, carbon, that got chucked out into space, and then into a big cloud and brought back together. Okay? But that's not the end of the story here, because as we fuse these lighter elements of hydrogen together into these bigger elements of helium, we actually release energy. That's why we're trying to do it on Earth. So what happens is each of these, as they get bigger, they shrink. And some of the mass that was made up in the hydrogen got turned into energy. And in my fancy animation there, I've turned it into light energy there with a little below. And that energy is the energy that makes all these particles move around and provides the pressure to hold up that star. And as soon as this energy can no longer get released, the star will collapse and die and go through what we call a supernova, which chucks all of this heavy stuff out into space that makes us. Okay? Now this process, this fusion process, was brought to you by his truly, Albert Einstein, and in this equation that you all know from TV, possibly from science if it was brought to you at some point, tells you that some of this mass, we can turn mass, the mass that was lost from here, into energy. And that's the energy that goes out to keep the star stable while it's alive. And that energy can come to us all the way up to iron. As soon as we get to iron, we can no longer release energy by fusing things together. It actually takes energy to do that. So all of these elements, heavier than iron, things like uranium, like plutonium, the stuff that we worry about certain people getting hold of, that stuff is only ever made when the star explodes through a supernova. Okay? So everything up to iron was made in a star, everything higher than iron there came in a supernova. And that's what a supernova looks like. And because it's so hot, as it cools down, it releases light. And the light that releases, different colours, come from different elements. So you get the red stuff from the outside, that red stuff showing you hydrogen on the outer layers of the star got chucked out. Stuff in the middle showing you things like oxygen, sodium, calcium. So all the different colours here in this supernova picture is showing you all the stuff that makes up you and the people sitting next to you, the chair you're sitting on, the floor you're walking on, the liquid you're drinking, the food you're eating. All of that stuff once went through a process like this. Now, what I'd like to do now is go, well, all of this stuff that makes up stars, I want to answer where does that come from? So I'm going to keep going back. I'm going to take you back to nothing. And hopefully some of you remember this. Edwin Hubble, you might have heard of him. His name, Hubble, has been used to name a famous telescope, the Hubble Space Telescope, which we look into space and look at very distant galaxies. And that's named after the work that this man did. But I don't want to give all the credit to him, because he actually borrowed some work from other people. He borrowed some work, first from Christian Doppler. Some of you might have heard the name of Doppler, with the Doppler shift. And this woman, that's not very well celebrated, Henrietta Leavitt, she did some fantastic work. And I'm going to go through the work that these two people did quickly to be able to allow this man to do his work, to get his finding, and to have his telescope named after. So the first one we're going to look at is Doppler, this man over here. So what Doppler did some work showing that if an object moved, what happens is the waves it emits changes frequency. So if anyone's ever stood on a bridge and dropped a pebble in the water, you've seen the ripples coming out, and the ripples come out with a nice certain distance. So a first ripple, second ripple, third ripple, maybe they stay 20 centimetres away from each other. But if the object's moving, the ripples get either pushed together or spread apart. And you would have seen this when you look at ducks swimming in the pond. So the duck here, because the duck is pedalling forwards, the ripples the duck is emitting push together, bunch together, and that pushes them together, making the wavelength smaller, just like over here. Okay, but behind, you can see that the ripples are spread apart. So what that means is, if we look at the space, stars look slightly different colours depending on their movement. So the first one, over here, it's a very bad picture, but that's planet Earth. So imagine you're standing there looking up at a star that's moving quickly around, so coming towards you or away. Now as it comes towards you, you can see the wave here that's being emitted getting a shorter wavelength. Now that means it starts to appear blue. And the animation is pretty good because it turns blue as it comes towards us. But if it's moving away, the wavelength, just like the ripples behind the duck, gets spread out. And that turns it red. And what we call this is a blue shift if it looks bluer, or a red shift if it looks redder as it moves away. Okay? So there's the first little bit of information that we're going to use. If something looks bluer, it must move towards you. If something looks redder, it must be moving further away from you. Okay? And just to demonstrate that a little bit more, I've got a rather annoying toy, but it's annoying, so you can have to plug it. Can you all hear that note? Okay, so just take off while that note plays a constant frequency, okay? I'm not going to do anything else to it but swing it around my head. Okay? So people in the front, if the string does break, it's not my fault, it's whoever tied the string off. So as it comes towards you, you hear the pitch get higher. As it goes away, you hear the pitch get lower. Okay? We all survive this, so, what we're going to do, that sort of backs this up within sound. We're going to bank that away a little bit, and we're just going to say, well, how can that get used a little bit later? Okay. The second thing, this is Leavitt's work now. Something you've all seen, especially if you drive and drive at night. So, as objects get further away, so these are all street lights. These street lights all have the same intensity. Okay? But as the object gets further away, you notice the closer one is bright. But as you look further away, it gets dimmer. Something you've known for ages. Something further away is dimmer than something closer. Okay? But we can use this in space. If we know that all certain types of stars are supposed to be a certain brightness, but it looks fainter, that tells us a measure of its distance. It must be further away. Okay? So here's a little bit. So the further away something is, that's given by its redshift, something we looked at a minute ago. The luminosity, that's how far it appears to be from us. So this is telling us the further something is away, the dimmer it appears. Okay? And this is where Henrietta Leavitt came in. She knew this idea, but she used this type of star. This is called a Cepheid variable star. Okay? Now, the only way we can guarantee we know the brightness of a star is to use these types of stars. So these stars, as you can see there, they oscillate, they sort of grow and shrink, grow and shrink. And we can measure the oscillation as it twinkles in the sky. And if you measure how long it takes to twinkle, you can actually then go from that and go, well, from its period, from how long it takes to twinkle, if it twinkles maybe 1.5 days or something, it will then give us a measure of its distance, how far away it is, so how bright it should be, and from that it can tell us its distance. So Henrietta Leavitt found a link between this type of star, which we can use as what we call a standard candle, some way of measuring distance in space. We can therefore get an accurate distance from these, and her work let us actually find out those stars outside our galaxy. Before then, we lived in a universe that was our galaxy big. We didn't know there was anything else out there. Okay? So putting all that together, what we were able to do, what Hubble was able to do, I've shown this to several classes. It's one of my favourite graphs of all time, not just because the finding it has, but just because of how bad that data is, and yet he drew a straight line through it. That reminds me of year 10 work sometimes. Oh, the experiment's not working, but we'll put it around. Okay. But from this, this graph here shows us exactly how it works in space. The further away something is, the faster it appears to be moving. And that speed, remember, came from how it appeared to be red or blue. Okay? So here's a much better, more modern data, okay, using things like error bars that A-level students might now know about. But there you go, much closer to a straight line because we can measure things better. We've got better technology now. Not only that, but we can measure much further away. And we find out that what Hubble actually found, that the further something is, the faster it appears to be moving is actually true. However, it's not, because of something that this man, again, him, discovered. So this is where I get to use the second time balloon. So what Einstein actually found was that space is not space. It's not just an empty space that we feel. He found that space is actually this thing called space-time. Okay, put it there. Space-time, like fabric, that, just like the top of a bed, if you imagine, a fabric. That if you put things in, it would bend, it would warp. Okay, and what that can do is that can make light do crazy things. Instead of travelling straight lines, it might curve. Okay, but if we now link that to what we found out from the Doppler shift, what I'm going to draw on the side of this, I'm going to draw a wave. Okay? So a wave with a particular wavelength. Okay, so a wavelength, and the wavelength there is what, about 2 centimetres or so? So what I do is I'm a star several billion years ago, I emit light into space. It's about 2 centimetres long, the wavelength, and again I'm going to blow up the balloon. By blowing up the balloon, that's representing space expanding as it's been travelling through space. And is the wavelength still 2 centimetres? No, it's much bigger. So what's happened is the wavelength, and I'll go back quickly to that diagram that we had. Okay. The wavelength has got bigger because space expanded, making it appear as if the star that emitted that light is moving away. But it's not. The star is stationary. From Einstein's work, space itself in between the star and us has expanded to make it look like that. Okay? Get that down again. So, And what we've been able to find from all the work that these famous scientists have done is that space itself is expanding. So all of the matter that went into the stars, that got fused together to make us, originated in space, that once upon a time, through this idea of space expanding, must have started in a very small space. But this man missed it. Okay, so back in 1915, he discovered this idea of space-time. But his belief was that the universe was static. It was always the same. It was in there forever and always will be. So I've got bits of work that these two guys actually worked on. And I'm going to show you his equation that Einstein made and show you how he made it wrong but also right at the same time. But these are two scientists. Now this one here, he just took it from a pure theoretical view, analysed Einstein's work and came to the finding that the universe is expanding. This guy came to it, but this guy loved that idea. And the clue is there. This guy's not just a physicist or a mathematician, this guy was a priest. And he loved the idea that, oh yeah, of course the universe expanded. Of course the universe started in a space, because God created it. And he loved that because it reaffirmed through physics his belief that the universe must have had a creator. It must have started somewhere. Okay? So, here is space. That was Einstein's view billions of years ago. Now, what's there, still is there, nothing's changed. But that wasn't true. And in order to make it like this is a really horrible equation. I'm not sure if anyone's going to go, yeah, I understand. This bit here means the expansion of the universe. So this is this term to do with the expansion of the universe. This bit here tells you how gravity should pull it back together. Because of the stuff in the universe, it should collapse in on itself. That thing's attracting that thing, it should pull itself together. This thing is to do with that curvature of space, whether or not it's actually curved because of things are in it. We determined that that's pretty flat, so that term's not really worried about. But this term here is what Einstein put in. Einstein put in this term because he didn't believe the universe could have changed size. So he put this term in to make sure that this bit and this bit could balance with this bit to make this zero, to make the universe static. And he called it his biggest blunder when he actually looked at Hubble's work. Because Hubble went, oh yeah, look, the galaxies are moving far away. Einstein actually phoned him up, didn't believe him, said, I'm going to come and see your results for myself and actually see whether or not that's true. And he went along, found out the universe started in Big Bang. This guy had discovered it years ago, but fudged his results because he didn't like what he found. And actually Hubble was the person who actually put the proof behind the pudding. So this here, expansion, this is the picture that we kind of have now. What we are made of now, which was originally started in stars, originally started in a finite space. And I always get people ask me, well, if that's where we started, how did that come to be? Okay, and this is where it's going to get a bit funky. I'm sorry, but this is where it's going to get a bit funky. And I've got a little, so what are you actually saying here? This is what's happened at the beginning, and we'll go through a little bit of it. I've got about 10 minutes to get the beginning done, it's great. So, first off, I have to say there was nothing. Okay, there was nothing. Because space hadn't been made yet, there was nothing there. No scientist, if anyone tells you they know what happened there, they're lying to you. At the moment, no scientist knows what this nothing was or where it came from. We have an idea about how matter came from space, but we don't know where space came from. Okay? So no one can answer that for you. Okay? But there was no space for anything to have occupied, so there's nothing smaller than a pinprick. Okay? The first thing to come into being was a vacuum. We can't explain from there to there, but we can explain from vacuum to now. Okay? Space was born and filled with unknown energy, and this was the singularity, the original singularity. Okay? And again, I've got it down there just to reaffirm what I just said. No one actually knows how it got there. Everyone's just speculating if they say they do. Okay? And that took about 0 seconds to happen. Okay? So it took pretty much no time to do. And that is a really hard bit of physics to work with because there's so much energy, so little space, and so little time to work with. Okay? But from about here we know what happened. Okay? So now we have to go to this man. I don't know if anyone's heard of Heisenberg. He came up with something called Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Okay? And he borrowed a bit of idea, again, from him. He's pretty much everywhere in cosmology. So this is now we're going to have to get you to do what Einstein came up with, and that's a thought experiment. We're going to have to picture something in your head. And I'll help you with a few diagrams, but PowerPoint doesn't really have much power behind that. So, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. This is it to a T. So, we've got this thing here, delta x, delta p. Now, what this means is our uncertainty. So, how sure are we about an object's position? Okay? How sure are we about how it's moving? And the certainty that we have there has to be bigger than a value. Now, to me that makes sense because I've looked at that many times and I've studied it, but that doesn't really make much sense to any people. Okay? So I can put down the definitions by all means. Okay? But the best way to do it is for a picture. Okay? So here's a picture. So if I took a camera and a ping pong ball, and I took the camera and I put its exposure time really small, okay? And by doing that, I take a picture of a ball that's moving. Trust me, that was moving. Okay? So this ball was moving, but I made the exposure time really small. What I've been able to do is capture where it was. I can see it was there. Okay? If I put a little mark on the table, I would have known it was there. But I don't have any idea about which way it's moving, what it's moving. Is it going up, is it going down? Is it going left, is it going right? Is it going diagonally up to the left? Is it a bit wonky? Don't know. Okay? But if I make the exposure time a little bit bigger, so I now expose it for longer, I can see the ball moving through space, and what I can do is I can say, well, I can see a faint ball there, and a faint ball there. If I take two positions, I can measure a distance. If I can measure a distance, and I know how long I exposed it for, I can actually work out its motion, I can work out its speed. I've got information about how it's moving, but by doing that, I lost information about where it was. I know where it was there, I don't know where it was there. Okay, I'm hoping that's kind of made a bit more sense, but just in case, here's another animation to reaffirm that point. So here's a meter stick. I start it at 0, I let it go, and I take a picture. Okay? By taking a picture, I got where it was, but I didn't have any idea about its position. But along the top, I knew it moved 50 centimetres in a certain amount of time. So this one I knew its speed and its motion. I didn't know where it was at any point in time. I couldn't have told you where it was. I can try. I think it's there. Okay, so I can't tell you where it was. So up here I have no idea about where it was. Down here I do because I took a snapshot. But from this picture, I could take it out of the room and show someone else. They have no idea which way the ball was moving or what it was doing. Okay? Now, that's the uncertainty principle in one sense. The second sense about it, is I can do something weird with it. I can manipulate it, as physicists love doing, and do that. I can change the equation by subbing in other equations. I'm not going to get you to do it, I'll show you how it's done. But what this means is we're not sure about the energy, or we're not sure about the time. So we change the position and motion to an uncertainty in energy and uncertainty in time. But if I take a snapshot of space, so if space made vacuum, again, we don't know how it got there, but we know it's there. So we're 100% sure about the vacuum. The problem is we don't have any idea about what's going on inside the vacuum. And something crazy can happen. There's something crazy that from the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, alongside some work from this man, we could do something crazy. Inside that box, what can happen is energy can come into being, energy can get borrowed and turned into particles for a very brief moment in time, and then they can come back together, turn back into energy, and disappear. Now that's fine if the box is stationary, but what we said was the box is expanding. So if I go back and I do that, and I make these particles, what happens is I can rip these particles apart before they can come back together, and I can make particles from nothing. And this happened at an immense rate at the beginning of the universe. So where did everything that we came from? It got borrowed from the vacuum. So yes, you're made up of matter. Yes, that matter is made from energy, but that energy came from nothing. So you were basically made, I'm sorry to say, of nothing. Okay? Sorry, but that's true. And on that note, I think that's where I'm going to leave it. So thanks very much for welcome back everybody. Great to hear Chris talk there. We don't actually know, well, we had an idea of what we were each talking about, but that was as fresh and as new to me as it was to you guys, as this will be to Chris. So enjoy the show, Chris. Right, so life on Mars. I'm holding on to a theme here, you can see, of the universe, the stars and everything else. And this is a tale of enlightenment, so I'm taking a slightly different approach here, and I'm telling you a story. And this story is quite a lot true, but I've added in a couple of little details. I've changed the order of things just a tiny bit, a bit of artistic license. But I'm not going to reveal to you what is true in this story and what is the artistic license, so you might want to wonder about that. As we finish it, and you might reflect on some of it. So let's have a look. The Tale of Enlightenment, where did it start? Well, it started about here. So this is Shell Centre on the South Bank in London, and back in the late 1980s, I had the privilege of working here. I'd come up from research, I'd been doing environmental research, and I'd suddenly found myself in Shell Centre in the Strategic Planning Department. A great one to be there. I was very privileged to be there. I'd still be there today if they'd kept me on. But it was a great place to be, and I was there for a 2-year secondment. And I had a degree in psychology on the back of some other bits and pieces, and I was employed there for this 2 years because of the psychology knowledge I had. And one of the projects I had while I was there was around accelerating corporate learning. It all sounds very corporate, very sort of formal, but accelerating corporate learning. How can we ensure that lessons learned in this part of the Shell group of companies would be shared and effectively spread to other parts of the company, so that we're not always reinventing the wheel? Now, in these days, 1980s, we didn't have the internet, or we had a very nascent internet. It was kind of an artificial internet, really. And so I used to get delivered to me lots of academic papers that I thought were going to help me think about how we were going to accelerate corporate learning. And on one particular day, I can remember vividly, I'd just been playing squash, had some lunch, and I'd come back to my office ready for a slight afternoon nap, and I picked up my in-tray and picked up the paper on my in-tray and saw this by Sherwood and Glidewell, were the authors. Now this was the late 80s, and this paper had been written in 1973, so it was already 10, 15 years old. But as I was reading this thing, I thought, hang on a minute, this is really good. And it was really good in the end for me for 2 reasons. I've given you a copy of this simply so that as we go through this Tale of Enlightenment, you might want to just occasionally look and see where we are in the model. So this is the model. It's common sense. It's very simple. What it's saying is, in terms of relationships, and these relationships can be relationships between two organisations. It can be a relationship between an organisation and an individual, and between two different individuals. It can be a romantic relationship or a professional relationship. So when I pondered this, I thought, what are you going to be most interested in? And I thought it would probably be the romantic relationships. So that's where I'm going to go with this. And there we go. So, sharing information and negotiating expectations, the first stage of any relationship. I'm not going to go into the details of that just yet, we'll look at it illustrated in a minute. If, when we first meet in a relationship, in whatever way it is, if you don't hear enough of what you want to hear, you just have a planned withdrawal. And that's the easiest time to get out of a relationship, in the first 10 minutes. After that, it starts to get complicated. If you do hear enough of what you want to hear, you accept roles. And in accepting roles, whatever they may be, you go into a period of stability and productivity. Now, from experience, stability and productivity lasts anything from about an hour to a week. Because after that time, the pinches start to occur.
Whoops, that isn't quite what I expected. Whoops, that's not the expectation I had. So this sort of stuff creeps in, but with a pinch comes ambiguity and uncertainty. Wow, this isn't what I thought. I don't like uncertainty. I don't like ambiguity. So anxiety, and if it goes on, resentment starts to settle in. If it's left in that way, comes the crunch. At a pinch, it becomes a crunch. Words are exchanged, things are said, emails are passed around. And with that crunch, we've got a choice. Typically what happens is, with a crunch, it's normally associated with a lot of energy, a lot of emotion. So on reflection, and once the crunch has happened, a day or two later, we might feel a little bit embarrassed about it. And we say, sorry, I didn't really know, I was having a bit of a bad day, I had a bad night's sleep. And you kind of say, sorry about that, and we tend to return to the way things used to be. But that means we're still in ambiguity and uncertainty. We can go around this loop numerous times. But every time we go around it, there's the other arrow. There's a little bit of withdrawal, and that's psychological withdrawal to start with. Oh, if she's going to do that, I'm going to do that. If he's going to do that, I'm going to do this. I'm going to withdraw some of my cooperation. And ultimately, if left unaddressed, it becomes a physical withdrawal. You start not turning up, start being late, start not agreeing to meetings. It's not the only way, of course, though. At the crunch point, what this suggests is, difficult though it might be, because it's under pressure, we should be going back and sharing information and negotiating expectations. Even better than that, at the original pinch point, we have a planned renegotiation at that point in time. But the number of people that are enlightened enough to have the planned renegotiation at the pinch point are very few, or I like to think of myself now, I'm a little bit more enlightened and I do it a bit more often. But where do we go to from here? What I want to talk about, life on Mars. Does this mean anything to anybody? Yeah, it means something to the teacher colleagues and a few others. Life on Mars, it was a series on TV, I don't know how long ago, a decade ago, and it was a fascinating series. Basically, it was a series about some police force, and this main protagonist here was in the modern times, and by some weird twist in the time-space continuum that probably involved space taking on the form of a donut, he was transported back in time. Chris can help us out with that later. But he was taken back in time and appeared in the 70s. And this was a fantastic programme, because unlikely though it might seem, it really put into juxtaposition what life is like for us now in the 21st century, our enlightened way, and what life was like back in the 70s. And drawing those comparisons, the non-PC, the different approaches to, well, in this instance in particular, to crime and the way policing happened. Great series, great programme. Why have I chosen Life on Mars? It links to Chris's talk. Also, this is my informative years in developing my first romantic relationships. And excuse me while I go to my Love Island bottle. My only prop. So, this is the time. It's the 1970s. The 1970s. So I'm imagining myself back at, late teens, something like that, and I'm starting to get early 20s. I'm getting into stuff, into relationships. It starts to get a little bit more serious. That was easy when I was at school. But I left school, it's getting a bit more complicated. And we didn't have Tinder. We didn't have social media. If I wanted to meet somebody to maybe start off with a romantic relationship, my choice was Friday night, go down the pub. It was that simple. Okay, so there it is, the Marquis of Cornwallis, a very desirable pub you can see there. So the Marquis of Cornwallis is where Kevin and I used to go. Kevin and I used to go to this pub every Friday night with the hopes that we were going to meet the ideal partner. And our ideal partner was going to just turn up, and we were best mates, and somehow two girls were going to walk in, and they would be best mates, and guess what? The match would be miraculous. Okay, just the naivety of youth, isn't it wonderful, eh? So, what's this going to happen for us? Well, we were pretty smart guys, I mean, who could resist us? Pretty smart guys. There's a couple of our other mates there as well. And what we were waiting for, we did this week after week. We went to the pub and we kind of got in there at 7:30. For some reason, we always get to the pub at 7:30, but no girls would turn up until 9:30. What were they doing with 2 hours? We never kind of worked that one out. But we'd be in the pub, we'd be waiting. And the problem with that as a strategy is that after 2 hours, drinking pints of McEwen's Export, we thought we were the bee's knees. But actually, when people started coming in at 9 o'clock, we didn't look quite so attractive to them. But we were lucky. We struck lucky on a particular Friday, because not only did 2 girls walk in, but they were friends, we were sober enough, and they liked the look of us, and we liked the look of them. Okay, so there they are, Stella and Celeste. How does that sound, Chris? So, we were lucky this day, but let me just tell you the story of how this unfolded on that very evening. This is the inside of the pub. Now, we didn't know this, but we were being really smart in terms of the way we positioned ourselves in the pub. It was instinctive. We just knew what to do by instinct. We never even thought that. It's only many years later that I thought that's what we were doing, and that's the reason we were. So, there's the door of the pub. We would always sit over here. Over here. Now, the clever thing about sitting there is, when somebody comes in the pub, our heads turn when the door opens, because as people come in the pub, if they see movement in the pub, their eye is drawn to movement. So, we can start the process of sharing information. Because when they walked in the pub, they looked our way, we looked their way, and we made eye contact. Now, eye contact's a very sensitive thing. If you make typically eye contact that I might make in a social setting, just looking around here, is approximately half a second. If I was to suddenly make eye contact for more than half a second, Mr. Eden, that's signalling all sorts of other things. And let's be blunt about it. Prolonged eye contact is signalling one of 2 things. It's either going to be lust or aggression. And Mr. Eden, I'm sure you don't want any one of those from me tonight. Okay. So, we look over, they look back, we make eye contact, bingo! 1.5 seconds. This is serious stuff going on now. We've communicated to each other, fancy you too, and we're on our roll. They come down to the pub, they come down to the bar, they kind of sheepishly look over again, and we look over again, and it's all going well. It didn't always work out like that, by the way. Sometimes they'd come in, make the initial eye contact, by the time they got to the bar, they decided it wasn't going to be on. But that's the way of signalling that to us. They come to the bar, they buy their drinks. Now, what we've done is we've communicated something, but we haven't yet established any expectations. So what they do next is they go over and they sit there. So now we've got this possibility of continuing the eye contact, this early dance, this early exchange of expectations in the relationship. If they've decided by the time they get to the bar they don't want anything more to do with us, they'll just walk around the corner and sit where we can't see them and we can no longer continue with this. They go and they sit over there. And they keep making eye contact with them, and now we know we're okay. 15 minutes now has to pass, we can't look too eager. And apart from that, we wait for them to drink their drinks, because we're gentlemen, and our next move is to go over and offer to buy them a drink. We can't do that when they've got a full glass in front of them. So 15 minutes goes by. Kevin and I are not stupid, we do not waste that 15 minutes. We're busy having conversations about who's going to get who. Okay? I'm going to get the redheads. I love the redheads, you know. And Kevin's saying, this is really great because I like the edgy looking one. So I'm going for redhead, he's going for edgy. I know this sounds awful, it's the 1970s, all right? So we've made all this decision. Interestingly, my wife told me many years later that I was a fool. She said, you're a fool to think you make the choice. They were making the choice all the time, yeah, because of the way they were engaging with us, and we were just seduced into thinking we would make. Anyway, we go over there, glasses have gone down, we go over there, and we walk up to them and say, hello girls, so can you buy your drink? And they say, oh yes please. So I think Stella had the Cinzano and lemonade, and I think Celeste had the rum and coke. So we go off and we buy the drinks, and we bring them back, and we sit down with our half pints, because we're not going to spoil this evening now, we're on a roll. And we sit down and we introduce ourselves. And I introduce myself to the girl with the red hair. Good evening, it's really nice to meet you. My name's Carl, and I tell you what my idea of fun is. I love going on holiday. I can think of nothing better to do than to sit on a tropical beach, watching the sun go down, with a pina colada, reading Keats. And she's thinking, bingo. And she says to me, much briefer introduction, wow, hello, my name is Stella and I like football. And I'm thinking, yes, this is a marriage made in heaven now, even before we got started. We carry on talking, we tell each other about each other, and we've done all of this stuff. And we've got on well enough all evening for us to decide we're going to take it to the next step. There it is. We've agreed to go to the cinema on Tuesday night. Okay? Tuesday night. Why Tuesday night? Because on Tuesday night, all the tickets are the same price. Because nobody ever goes to the cinema on Tuesday. But it does get crowded. So for something like the equivalent today of maybe £5, you can sit anywhere in the cinema. And the only thing that determines that is where you are in the queue. Anyway, I've agreed to meet Stella at 7 o'clock outside the cinema. Now, knowing the doors open just after 7, I'm there pretty sharpish. I'm there at like 20 to 7 because I want to be at the front of the queue to get the best seat, biggest choice. So I'm there at 20 to 7 and I'm at the front of the queue, which is brilliant. A few people start turning up quite soon after me and the queue starts to get bigger and it's 10 to 7. And at 10 to 7 I'm thinking, 10 to 7. Wonder where she is. If she was keen, surely she'd be here by now. I was here ages ago. 5 to 7 times round. This is not feeling good. She's still not here. If she was keen, she'd be here by now. Of course, this is my business. I've got to face, this is one of the lessons I learned. I've got to face what I'm putting into the situation. 7 o'clock comes round. Okay, I'm justifiably getting a bit anxious now. I'm getting anxious because she's not there. The uncertainty, is she going to turn up? Am I going to be standing here and stood up for the night? 7:05. The door's open. I'm now embarrassed. I'm saying to people, no, go by, I'm just waiting for mine, just carry on, guys. And 7:10, I'm really beginning to think this is outrageous. And I'm beginning to feel with all sorts of resentment. I'm really ready to kind of give it all up. And then Stella comes around the corner. And she comes walking up to me and she says, hello, Carl. Sorry I'm a little bit late. What do I say? That's all right, no problem. Come on. And then she says the next thing. She says, I was a little bit late because I was chatting to Celeste on the phone. What? Chatting to Celeste on the phone? So you mean to tell me that you were chatting to her on the phone and leaving me standing here for 10 minutes? No, I didn't say that. I said, oh really? How's Celeste doing? Isn't that lovely? You know, is she alright? So we go in. So what we're seeing here from your pictures, if you want to look at them, we're seeing lots of pinches. I've had my own internal crunch. But when she's come along, I've simply returned to the way things used to be. So we've gone in the cinema, we've had a good time. I can't remember the film we watched now, I remember the films we used to watch, some of them. And we're off to a good start now. All of these things are forgotten. I don't want to make a fuss about any of this stuff because it's trivial, isn't it, really? So we've got our relationship going and it all seems good. She is always late though. Wow, look at that beast. That is a Mark III Cortina in peppermint sea green. Never ever misplaced it in the car park. So the reason for putting this out, when we go out driving. So we go off to Epping Forest and places like this. All happening in London. We're off to Epping Forest and we had nice days out. But you know, there was something that happened on that first drive to Epping Forest. My cassette of choice in the car was Mott the Hoople. Anybody heard of those? Oh, good, there's a few Mott the Hoople. So, big, good rock. Look at those boots. So, yeah, Mott the Hoople. I'm playing Mott the Hoople. And what does Stella say to me when we're going along the road, Mott the Hoople on full volume? Whoa, Mott the Hoople, eh? I've not heard this for a long time. What does that really mean? It means, what are you doing playing this stuff? I've not heard it for a long time, mainly because I don't like it. So, I didn't realise this, a bit dumb. I'm not realising I'm picking up some stuff with it. So, after a couple of times going out in the car, Stella decides to bring her cassette on. George Benson? So, George Benson, I say. That's interesting, isn't it? I haven't heard George Benson for a while. So we've got some other tensions building up in this relationship. Are we addressing them? Of course we're not. We don't want to spoil the fun. And it was fun, you know. We've got off on holiday. I forgot the keys. But at least we had a drink sitting on a beach in Greece. So we're enjoying ourselves and we're having a nice time. It's progressing well. Then we get into a nice new habit. We go down to Police's Cafe every Sunday morning. We pick up the newspapers on the way. It's our little thing. We pick up the newspapers, so we go into Police's and we have a nice cooked breakfast on a Sunday morning. It's the time when we can have for ourselves. Everything is looking good. And then comes football season. She said to me, my name's Stella and I like football. Right? I just thought that was a bit of spin. Stella liked football. And what Stella liking football meant was that every Saturday she would go to see Millwall. Okay? Now, it's one issue to want to go off and see a football team every Saturday. It's another one when you're a West Ham supporter. But the fact is that she's going off to see Millwall. I mean, if anybody's familiar with Romeo and Juliet, we suddenly became the star-crossed lovers. Because her tribe and my tribe did not like each other. They were against. So we've got all this extra pressure. But it gets worse than that because she goes to football every week. And her idea of a good time on a Saturday is to get up to the den early, meet all her Millwall mates, have a few drinks, go and see the match. After the match, come out, have a few drinks, and then eventually roll up at home at about 9 o'clock in the evening. And then she'd put on Match of the Day and fall asleep. So what's happened? This is the worst of it. Once the football season started and she's falling asleep and she's kind of coming up to bed at maybe 3 o'clock in the morning, having to sleep on the sofa, I'm still getting up at 8 o'clock on Sunday morning and I'm wanting to go down to Bleach's for breakfast. But Stella no longer is getting up at 8 o'clock in the morning. She's getting up at 10 o'clock in the morning, which is about 2 hours too late for me and 2 hours too early for her. This goes on for a few weeks. We stop going to Bleach's and I start trying to sort of communicate in the best subtle way I can, which is I still get up at 8 and I factor around in the kitchen a little bit, make a bit of noise and stuff, and eventually she comes down. And I think I'm getting somewhere, because on one particular week she comes down at 9 o'clock. So she's coming down at night, we've still got a chance to get to Police's. But then the big incident happens. She goes into the kitchen and she starts shouting. So I jump up and I go rushing in to see what's happening. What's wrong? I can hear you shouting. I can tell you what's wrong. It's that. And I'm looking and she's pointing at the tea bag on the breadboard. I'm saying, what? The tea bag's the problem? No, that's you. I said, I'm a tea bag. No, you're not a tea bag. You are the person that is untidy around here. You're untidy, you're sloppy, you don't respect the things I'm buying. You know, it's really, she's in a bad mood. And so she comes out with all this stuff and I'm thinking, well, hang on a minute. I've left the tea bag there. Look at the state you left the living room in when you came up last night. There's a big argument going on. And somehow, not the Hoople, and George Benson, and the colour of my car, and Millwall, it all comes up because all of that stuff's just been sitting there waiting to come up. And so we have a bit, I hate arguments. I hate arguments. So I'm saying, whoa, hang on a minute, Stella, I'm just popping out. I'm going to go and get some breakfast. But getting breakfast on my own is boring. So I pop round to see Kevin. And I say, Kevin, come on, mate. He comes round for breakfast with me. He's a good friend. So we get to Bleach's and I start pouring out my heart to Kevin. And I'm telling him this happened and that happened, and she said this and I said that, and stuff's going on. And Kevin starts saying, what? You said that? And I begin to feel like I'm losing Kevin, and he's beginning to take Stella's side. And I'm thinking, really? So I remember something that Stella once said about Kevin's hair, and I tell him, he's back on my subject. So I've got such a friend. Anyway, it's great talking to Kevin. He's really helped me out with all of this stuff. And I decide that, yeah, that was outrageous. It all got out of hand. We just need to be sensible adults about this. So I go back home again, and I go in the house, and I'm about to apologise to Stella. And I'm saying, Stella, I've got something to say to you. No, shut up. I've just got something to say to you. Nothing really is on this. And she said, I'm sorry. I thought, oh, sorry. I said, what? Well, I'm sorry too. Well, you know. So we make up. It was brilliant. Because it's our first argument in 9 months. And we're making up that easily. So we carry on for a little while, and we have another argument in a few weeks' time. Maybe 3 or 4 weeks goes by, we have an argument. We get over that one, maybe 7 or 8 weeks goes by, and we have another argument. So from the model, what you can see is we're going around this thing, we're never really addressing what the issues are. So slowly but surely, we're withdrawing from the relationship. Now, let's just say I wasn't that naive for a minute. I've gone home, made up. What does this model tell us we've got to do? That at whatever point we come to these pinches and crunches, what we need to do is we need to look back and share the new information and renegotiate expectations. So, I invite you out for a meal. Instead of going to the cinema on Tuesday, why don't we go out for a nice meal? Oh, Stella says, that's a lovely idea. So we go out for a meal. You can see I've smartened myself up a bit now. So we're out for the meal and we've got through the first course and then Stella says, this is really lovely. And I said, yeah, it's nice, isn't it? I just thought it'd give us a really good opportunity to, sort of chat about how things are going. Whoops, I pressed the button. Yeah, talk about how things are going. You're talking about Millwall. You're talking about Celeste and having gone on the phone to her. No, I wasn't very. Yes, you are, aren't you? Well, why are you starting? That's how I'm a good guy, by the way. So we finish up having an argument. A big argument goes on again, and we just don't resolve it again. So ultimately, of course, this becomes yet another of those, for my first decade, another one of those 2-year relationships. See, an awful lot of those, they seem to reach. But there are other solutions. Had this been around in those days, we could have a mediator. We'd have gone to relate counselling. So where does that fit into all of this stuff? Relate counselling fits in because with a relate counsellor had been in the restaurant, sitting on their own, sad. But they would come over and say, oh, it sounds like we need a bit of mediation here. What would have happened? So who called the meeting, the mediator would say? And I say, it was me that called the meeting. Okay, okay, Carl, you start off and just tell us what you think. Well, we've been getting on really well, and the thing is, things change. And at this point, Stella says, yeah, blah, blah, blah. And I said, shush, the mediator said, quieten Stella down. Because there's so much of I want to get my word in. And what the mediator does is keeps Stella quiet, and later on me, quiet, while the person has a chance to actually say what they want. And when I'm given a chance to say what I want, what does it sound like? It doesn't sound like a big argument. It sounds like, well, we used to have a really good time. I used to really enjoy seeing you at the weekends and, going down to the Leaches for breakfast on Sunday was the high spot of my week. But since the football thing's been happening, and by the way, it's okay that you go to football. I've resolved the fact that you support Millwall. It's all right. But, if we could I just miss seeing you. We've got a great relationship. I miss you on Sunday. Sounds quite good, doesn't it? Yeah. So then Stella's got her chance. Well, okay, but you have been a bit like this, and you'd always leave your tea bags on this, and I go, yeah, okay, and we can have a reasonable discussion and sort it out with the mediator. That never worked with Stella, of course, but I took the learning away from that, and it's really worthwhile because nowadays I'm able to manage my relationships so much better. So much better. Because I know about this model, because I know about the pinches and crunches, because I'm able to address those pinches sooner, most of the time, not always. And because I'm able to listen to what people have got to say, rather than try and jump in all the time. It only takes one to get this right, and then it all starts to happen. And what starts to happen, one of my favourite pictures, that's what starts to happen when you get it right. So these are my 2 fantastic kids. It's now Alison. Stella was his history. Not that much history. She's in New Zealand living with her partner and we Skype each other over Christmas. So still great friends. But when you get it right, that's the sort of thing that happens. And I just wonder what they're thinking to each other when they're doing what's they think there. But just in summary, to bring this around, let's have a look at what happened. With Stella in the story, it was all about the tea bag in the end. It was the tea bag that broke the camel's back. It was the last thing. It was the tea bag on which everything behind this breadboard that you can see was brought up again because it hadn't been addressed as well. So yes, that's when it happened. But the trouble with trying to negotiate then is we're doing it when there's so much energy and emotion invested in the relationship, and when there's too much time being spent on building up those resentments. So that's when it was addressed. It could have been addressed here. It didn't have to get that bad. Once the football season started, we could have had a negotiation about that. It could have been addressed here when I found out it was Millwall. It could have been addressed in the car. George Benson, Mott the Hoople. It could have all been addressed at those different stages. But the thing that's addressed at the what would that have sounded like? What would that? Could we have saved ourselves some time? Just one last bit here. So if you can remember the cinema, I'm standing there. It's now 7:10. And Stella's turned up. I'm really anxious, worrying about whether she's going to turn up at all. And she says, oh, sorry I'm late. I could have done that differently. I could have said, Sorry you're late? I should think you should be sorry. I've been standing here for 10 No, that's not going to work. Early days of the relationship, you know. Well, what I could have said is, oh, okay, I appreciate you're late. It's just that I'm a bit of a stickler for time, so I was kind of getting a bit worried you wouldn't turn up. That would have been honest. If at that point Stella had thought to herself, oh, I'm a bit of a nutter here, then at least it would have been good to have sorted that out then, rather than had to wait for 18 months for all this other stuff to build up, and maybe the fact that she's always late, still driving up the wall. So, dress it early. But ultimately, of course, what it's all about is how honest we are when we first get together with people. And let's not expect too much. I don't know when you're going to be doing CVs and things, and you've done your university thing. Let's be sort of reasonably straight about this. Of course, they're all true, but you don't tell them about the stuff you don't want them to know about, of course. It wouldn't have been good if I had gone up and said to Stella, oh, hello, my name's Carl and I snore and I've got smelly feet. That wouldn't have done it. It had to be the poetry and the beach and the pina colada in order to get past first base there. But honesty isn't essential, but we certainly have to address and be acknowledging that whenever we get into a relationship, they always have that honeymoon period, and there's always those pinches that creep in. And the one thing that changes the quality of our relationships is the degree to which we're able to negotiate effectively in those renegotiations, preferably at the pinch points. So there it is, that's the model. I hope you've found that interesting. The value of it, again, is not just in its simplicity, that's part of it, but also the real value comes when you use this model to think about your relationships, whether they're past relationships that you want to think, where have I done that differently, whether they're current relationships that you want to manage well, or whether it's a new relationship you're going into, remember, with a person, with an organisation, all sorts of relationships this works for, and just being aware of that model and managing the relationship effectively through it. In our own experience, that's what I'd like you to do. And that's it. Thank you very much.